Para hablar, para hablar de esto tenemos a Michael Rubenstein. Michael Rubenstein es fundador y presidente de APPNexus, una de las principales plataformas de exchange que existen en el mundo actualmente. Él, a pesar de su juventud, tiene un formidable récord de haber trabajado, porque fue fundador, además de la exchange de DoubleClick, fue responsable de su fundación. Después de la compra de DoubleClick por Google, fue también responsable del desarrollo y la instalación de la exchange de Google.
Thank you so much, and thank you to iMedia for hosting this event. What a spectacular venue this is. Beautiful tower. I should have mentioned in the beginning I'm afraid of heights, but I think I'll be okay. And it's great to be in Madrid. This is actually my first time ever in Madrid, and it's just an incredibly beautiful city. I'll come back anytime, seriously. If you ever have any questions for APPNexus, don't call, just send an email, I'll get on the plane and come right back here. I'm going to talk today about a very important trend and something that we've built our business on at APPNexus that I call real-time advertising. And it's something that iMedia has been a very early adopter in embracing in the European market. And when I say real-time advertising, that may be a new term for many of you. And some of you have heard terms over the last several years like ad exchanges or programmatic buying and selling of digital advertising. And they're all, to me, different variants of the same trend, which is that if you look at the history of digital media in visual graphical form, so primarily banner advertising, rich media advertising, etc. on the internet, the buying and selling of it really hasn't been that different from the earliest days of the internet to today. And even in some previous media like radio or television or newspaper, you're talking about the way that transactions normally happen were between a buyer and a seller, between a media agency, between a publisher, and there was an insertion order largely negotiated, and there was a traditional way that is today being very much disrupted by these automated techniques that have come along in the market. And that's what all these terms are all about: real-time, programmatic, exchanges, and so forth. It's about the introduction of digital or automated techniques into what has been a traditionally very human and very manual process. I'm going to talk a little bit about it today and what we're doing, what iMedia is doing. But just a quick moment about APPNexus. We help major sellers of online advertising to build marketplaces that connect content to marketers, agencies, ad networks, and others in real time. So we are an ad technology specialist that helps to connect the buy side and the sell side. That's our role in the ecosystem. And we have enjoyed a very outstanding partnership with iMedia. iMedia is one of the first large European companies that's innovated on our technology platform and successfully brought ad exchange capabilities to market in the Spanish market, in the French market, and so forth. And so they've embraced these techniques I'm going to talk about today to drive a lot of success already for publishers and agencies alike. Okay, I'm going to start with a brief history of how this space came about, how this ad exchange space came about. And it all started back in 2004. At that point, as you just heard, I was the founder of a business called DoubleClick Ad Exchange, which is today a very large marketplace operated by Google. And if you look back at 2004, the first automated marketplace for advertising had just really come around. And that was Google's marketplace for text-based advertising. And at the time, it seemed very new and very innovative. But in reality, it was a very simple marketplace based on bidding for keywords that would have a profound impact on how people thought about buying and selling media from that point onwards. And around 2004 or so, people started realizing that there was great inefficiency in display advertising as well. And a lot of the way that people were buying and selling from each other was, as I mentioned, very manual. And so the first exchanges, including DoubleClick's exchange and the Right Media exchange, they came around in 2004 or so. And they were about people, instead of daisy chaining impressions to each other or redirecting impressions to each other or making upfront buys with each other, about creating an auction where every single impression that was allocated to that marketplace was bidded off in real time. Was bidded off not in real time. Sorry, was bidded off through an auction, and that was the first version of the exchanges. They were very, very simple, and that existed for a few years until about 2007. MySpace actually was an early innovator in what became the real-time exchange space. The difference between real-time and what had come about previously was that in the first phase of exchanges, if someone wanted to buy a display ad impression, the logic that they made or that they put in was very much predetermined. There was no decisioning made in real time. It was all static rules that had been determined well in advance of when that auction took place. And what happened in 2007 is real-time came about for the first time, meaning every single time an impression got auctioned off or was available for sale, so in other words, a user comes to a website, the ad that was going to be shown to that user, what happened was information about that impression at that very second was sent out to advertisers around the world who then decided what ad they wanted to show, how much they wanted to pay, and so forth, returned a creative, and then the winning ad was served. And that was very complex because the computing power to support something like that never even existed before to make all of that happen, right? Because between the time a user comes to a website and an ad is shown, there can only be a window of 10, 20, 30 milliseconds, or the consumer notices latency on the page, right? They notice latency in the ad serving. And so that was a real innovation in the market in 2007, and that's gone right up to today. So in 2007, the first real-time impression was served, and now today, there's about 25 billion real-time impressions served per day. It's been probably the fastest growing segment of the digital advertising landscape, and it's been an area of tremendous growth, and I think we're still in the early stages of it. Okay, so let me talk about real-time bidding for a second. The advantage is making very granular decisions on an impression-by-impression basis. Sometimes another term that gets thrown around in conjunction with advertising exchanges a lot is audience-based buying, right? The shift from publishers selling content as a proxy for audience as opposed to selling audiences directly, right? And I think we've seen a movement on the agency side also for wanting to buy specific categories of people as opposed to content itself, right? Because content has been, to date in the internet, a very big proxy for users, but it hasn't actually represented the users themselves. And so the ability to decide on an impression-by-impression basis, regardless of where the impression is served, is really a lot of the power that's been out there or that's been brought to market in real-time bidding. So let me just explain how it works in a very simple example here. So CNN is the website here, and a user comes to CNN, as I mentioned before. And what happens is, say you have, a ping is sent out to the advertisers who are participating in the auction. And they all basically return a bid, so in this case $2.50, $3.25, $4.10. They all return prices and a creative to the auction, and in this case APPNexus is creating the auction. The winning bid here is $4.10, and the ad is then served on the web page. And all of that happens in far less than 100 milliseconds, 25 billion times a day. Just to give you a sense of the scale of this, the New York Stock Exchange only trades a few billion transactions per day in the entire marketplace. So the computing power required to be able to process this kind of transactions is more than it's required to handle the largest stock exchange in the world. So, why does RTB matter? It matters for both buyers and sellers of media. So for sellers, what they're able to do is open up a world of impressions, right, to a much greater selection of advertisers. So now what happens literally for every single impression, if it's allocated to an open market and there's not a lot of restrictions put on it, you're able to open up every impression to a world of advertisers, and that creates more competition, and more competition drives prices up, and it also allows the publisher to reach advertisers that they might not have been able to reach in the past. So that's number one. One of the things that's come along with real-time, though, is also publishers getting controls so that they can make sure that the impression that they allocate doesn't necessarily cannibalize their direct sales channel, which still, in most cases today, generates the majority of the revenue for most major publishers and media companies out there. And so a publisher, for example, may say, I want to allocate this impression to the marketplace, but I want to block out a certain set of advertisers. I want to restrict some information about the impression that my sales force may have, but I don't want the whole market to have, and so forth. And thereby protecting their sales channel. They can get the benefits of incremental revenue without cannibalizing their own yield. And then on the advertiser side, advertisers love this, again, because of the granularity of the targeting they're able to do. Very, very specific targeting. Being able to target a specific cookie pool and nothing else. Or being able to target a specific geo or time of day or anything, but with a massive supply of impressions on a very, very granular basis. I mentioned a little bit already about the technology required to be able to support this. We've seen huge impression growth. So I mentioned earlier that today there's about 25 billion real-time impressions available globally. And that's up from almost nothing 3 years ago. And in Europe, we've seen, I'll talk a little bit more about this as well, but we've seen increasing adoption of this as well. And so you can see this gray line here showing that 150 billion impressions real-time today in Europe. A small percentage of that today is in the Spanish market, but I think we expect to see that to continue to grow. And I'll talk a little bit what we've seen in some other European markets as well. So, I want to talk about some interesting trends that we're seeing in the market as it relates to real-time advertising. So one is that display in general has become much more important over time in the advertising mix. You know, there was a time a few years ago when search advertising comprised a larger portion of overall budgets than graphical advertising or display advertising. And that is changing rapidly. And what you see on this line is that in the US, for example, in 2012, we're seeing the gap close between search advertising and display advertising. And the expectation is that in 2014, display advertising overtakes search advertising and becomes a larger share of the overall market. Part of that is driven by increased brand advertising, right? As we all know, the web has been great as a performance-based media, but to date hasn't attracted as much brand dollars as television, for example, and that is going to start to change. But the real growth in digital advertising over the last several years has been the growth of performance-based media and the growth of real-time advertising, driving most of the growth in display advertising today. So that's one obviously important trend. I think the other is the increase of programmatic buying. And so if you see here in 2012, we expect that real-time will be about a $2 billion market worldwide, growing to somewhere north of $5 billion in 2015. And even the real-time space is changing a lot. So at first, as I mentioned, it was a lot about very pure performance. There were a lot of pure performance campaigns. That mix is starting to change a lot. And what we've seen in most markets in which we are today is that now quality publishers and quality advertisers are migrating more brand response or more quality inventory into the environment as well. Microsoft is a great example. We're a technology provider who's powered Microsoft's advertising exchange globally, and they now allocate today homepage inventory. MSN's highest quality inventory today, in a lot of cases, is available for buying through RTB, as opposed to in the past when it was only available through a direct sales force. And so that's driving a lot of this, and I think that programmatic premium is the next wave of where this is going. So more quality inventory and more more reserved inventory as well. And so we think that ultimately the display advertising world ends up with 3 tiers. And those 3 tiers are custom, and that's the stuff that can never really be automated because it's so creative and it's so integrated with the experience on the site that it really has to be negotiated between a buyer and a seller directly. Things like directly integrated sponsorships really fit into this category. So that's one category, and that's always going to be a huge percentage of what happens in digital advertising and in display advertising. The next tier is what I'm calling programmatic premium, which is the automation of reserved buys, meaning being able to go to a publisher and buy a reserved package that previously would have been only buyable through a direct sales force, and being able to do that in an automated fashion. That's coming soon, and I would expect I'll probably be up here next year talking about that. And then the third tier is RTB, which is the auction-based technique that I just talked about. And I think really those 3 tiers are going to be how display advertising plays out for many, many years to come. So one question that's raised is, how does that impact the role of the sales force in the traditional media team? Well, some people fear that does the sales force become obsolete? My argument is that it does not become obsolete, that the role of the sales force changes, that the role of the sales force becomes to continue to push that custom tier into more premium ad units, into more higher CPM units, and probably even into more disruptive units, although one might argue into more engaging experiences as well. And so I think that in the future, the sales force has probably a role to be much more consultative and use data and use these programmatic techniques to do their job, but there probably is not as much direct selling of standardized ad units that can be automated by machines. So the role of the sales force is going to change a lot because of this over the next several years. There's no question about it. And then the second thing is, well, what does this mean for the media buyer? And I think the media buyer's role is starting to change as well. Media buyers, I think we've seen it in a lot of these markets in which we've participated, are using much more automated techniques, are using much more data to make decisions today than they did in the past. And it's not unusual in the US or Canada or UK and other markets where we've seen rapid adoption of RTB to see the emergence of new business models like trading desks inside agencies, or even trader mentalities, I guess I would say, inside the agency, where people want to use data to make smarter decisions in real time in order to be able to get the best results possible out of display advertising. And that's requires a more analytical and a more technological skill set, I think, than what has existed mostly to date inside the media buying organizations. So another really important trend, Gerd talked in his remarks about the emergence of platforms like Facebook, for example. Well, the same thing is happening in the world of ad technology. And so, let me give you an example. APPNexus announced back in November that we created the first app marketplace for ad serving companies. But basically what that means today is that people who are using our ad technology platform can go into the user interface and download an app the same way you would if you were using your iPad and you wanted to download an app. Except instead of the app being a consumer-faced thing, like you download Spotify onto your iPad, the app that you're downloading is a ad technology company, or a data company, or a rich media company. And it takes over real estate inside the APPNexus user interface and becomes something that you use as part of your managing your workflow when you log into the UI. And that's a really new concept. You know, I've spent 10 plus years in advertising technology, and if you look back in the past, ad technology was very much a black box thing. A publisher was someone who sold media. They used an ad serving system. It was very closed. It didn't integrate very easily with other systems. And that's really starting to change. And so what I'm seeing now happen a lot in the market is you're seeing ad serving platforms like APPNexus open up, and other companies build on top of those platforms in order to be able to offer unique value to the buyers and sellers who use them. And so we've seen that both on a global basis, but also on a local basis. And I think that's very exciting, this openness and this ability to customize and be able to get data in and out and build new and interesting applications on top of an ad technology system so that you can really customize the technology that you use in advertising. I think is really interesting and really cool and a very important trend. And I think the last trend that I'm seeing a lot of this year is this is the year to me that Europe really embraces real-time advertising, real-time bidding. And it really is. I mean, we have been doing this for many years, and you know, I've always been in the European market, and there's been signs of interest where we've seen, you know, massive adoption in the United States. But this year, it's really flipped over. The United Kingdom, for example, there is a deeper adoption now of real-time buying and selling than even in the United States. I'm convinced of it. The largest buyers and sellers online are moving aggressively into this direction. In France, the same thing. Germany, I was in yesterday. A year ago, I was in Germany, and people said, Germans will never adopt real-time advertising technologies, which didn't really make sense to me, given, you know, the engineering culture and so forth. And I think what we've seen yesterday and recently is that the opposite is happening. The Germans are moving aggressively into this market as well. And so part of it is just a shift in mentality in thinking about how to take advantage of the opportunities here. But I think there are some things that I've noticed in the European market that are likely to impact you and that are likely to impact the Spanish market as well. Some of them include the fact that new business models will emerge. You know, inside the agency, for example, you may not have the expertise to just rush quickly into understanding how to capitalize on RTB. What we've seen in other markets is that the rise of things like agency trading desks, or the rise of trading desk partners like High Media, or even other local independents, have eased that transition. And that's not that different than what you've seen when any new channel comes up, whether that's search or Facebook, right? There's always those specialist skill sets, those specialist firms that come up to help people take advantage. And so if you're not seeing those already in the market, and I think you are, you're probably starting to right now, you're going to see more rapidly those companies emerge. And they'll go from being really small to really big very quickly. So that's one thing we've seen. The other is what I think of as hybrid buy-sell models. So again, it used to be that a publisher was someone who had inventory and sold media against that, and an agency was someone who was buying media, buying directly negotiated media from that. And we're seeing all of that change right now. I'm seeing publishers who are using their data and the relationship that they have with consumers to be able to expand the scope of what they do to buy ad audiences and fulfill campaigns across the entire web, in a way acting like ad networks. That's a really interesting trend to me. And I'm also seeing agencies buy media and then resell that media on the open marketplace to other advertisers if they think someone could monetize it better than them. And so to me, this notion of buyers on one side and sellers on the other side is really starting to change, and you're seeing a hybrid of both. Publishers, to me, are acting more like agencies, and agencies more like publishers, and everyone like ad networks. And I think that that's a really important trend that we've seen. Rapid adoption of new technologies is another. So the technology standards of old just don't really make sense anymore because they don't enable people to take advantage of these opportunities. And so old line ad serving platforms, for example, are being forced to adapt or die. High Media is a great example of someone who rapidly adopted the APPNexus technology platform in order to be able to give them the capabilities to do this in market, but there are others as well. The next is what I would say 3-scale digital ad channels. I was meeting with a very large agency in France recently who told me that in digital, they only think about 3 channels. There's social, Facebook mainly, search, Google mainly, and what they call programmatic display, which was the buying of not just banner units and rich media standard units, but video through real-time marketplaces, and building core competencies and skill sets around that as well. And I think that trend of those 3 major channels, social, search, and programmatic display, is going to be how the market plays out over the next several years. And then the final thing is, what we've seen in Europe is the same thing that we saw in the US, which is challenges around data transparency and talent development as being the major barriers in the market. And I would expect to see the same thing in the Spanish market. In terms of data, there's conversations, especially at the European Union level and in countries in particular, about how personal data should be protected, how it should be leveraged for purposes of advertising. Those issues are very important and are still being resolved and will have an impact on what data can be leveraged and how in this marketplace. And that's an important challenge that's going to play out over the next several years, and we're starting to see those conversations happen here. And then the second thing is talent development. The skill sets of old in the media world don't necessarily translate into the real-time world. I mean, yes, of course, relationships matter, and yes, of course, media planning hasn't fundamentally changed. But what we found is that the requirement to have analytical people who have a trading mentality and who can really understand technology is a skill set that's required. It doesn't necessarily exist today inside agencies and inside major publishers. And I think that we've seen that until those skill gaps are bridged, that's a gap that prevents people from really capitalizing on the opportunities presented by real time. Okay, so just a few words about what we are doing to drive innovation in this space. I mentioned the fact that we created this apps platform. So if companies use our ad serving platform, they can take advantage of technologies that people are building on top of it. We call them apps by over 30 companies in the space. We announced also back in November that people can now buy and sell video, so pre-roll units and so forth, programmatically through RTV, which is quite interesting. And to me, getting back to Gert's comments about video and TV and so forth, this is the first step toward commercials effectively being bought and sold programmatically. I think that's going to change over the next several years, depending also on what happens with digital television. But I think that you'll start to see these techniques bleed far, far beyond where they started, which was in kind of the remnant display tier, and affect a lot more premium inventory and affect even video inventory as well, as it is starting to today. And then finally, what we're doing is we created a program called APPNexus Accelerate, where we partner with startups in a particular market, and we help them to get funding to build apps or build technology on top of our own technology platform. And that's a really innovative thing that just is something that one would expect to see more in the world of smartphones, for example, in operating systems there, than you would in the world of ad technology. And so APPNexus and our investors and others are actively funding companies right now who are building technologies for this new real-time world and working with venture capitalists so that they have access to those technologies. So if there are venture capitalists in the room as well who want to see local companies in the Spanish market take advantage of real-time, you should come talk to me as well. So that's my presentation. Do we have time for any questions? Yeah.
I think one of the issues is about the quality of the publishers and how good the quality is for premium advertisers. What's your plans to get premium publishers? How you attract them? Newspapers, premium portals that we can convince the advertisers.
Yeah. So what is the plan to get premium content into the platform? Well, it's interesting. 2 weeks ago, a set of publishers in Canada, the most premium publishers in the country, launched something called the Canadian Premium Audience Exchange. And they launched that built on APPNexus technology. And this was a group of publishers who are television broadcasters, major print publishers. They got together and they said, we're going to take our inventory, we're going to brand it as Canadian Premium Audience Exchange and allocate it to the real-time channel and monetize it that way instead of through the traditional way, which had been through their direct sales force. And I thought that was a very, very big step. And here's what convinced them to do it. Number one was they saw that all the demand hooked into the platform was increasing a lot. They see that the agencies, and through their conversations with agencies, they see that they really wanted to buy more this way, so that convinced them to shift. And then the second was the controls that I mentioned earlier. The fact that they could not expose full information about the impression, like maybe in the case of the Canadian exchange, they're exposing the fact that it's a sports channel or women's channel or something like that, but they're not exposing complete information about the impression. Convince them that they could take advantage of new revenue opportunities for this inventory, but at the same time not cannibalize or not risk the relationship that the direct sales force had with the agency as well. And so I think that there's a real-world example there of how premium publishers are taking advantage of the opportunity, but leveraging things like controls to make sure that it's a benefit to the business as opposed to creates cannibalization. Paths and another through programmatic. The answer is yes. I do think there will be two different ways of planning, but I think that the buying process is going to be so vastly different for the two. But I think that a lot of what today is sold as premium will move into the programmatic category. My theory on automation is that anything ultimately that can be automated will be automated. And so I think that's what I talked a little bit about in the reservation-based tier, is that the next phase to me of where real-time is going is to automate a lot of the reservation-based inventory that's sold today. That doesn't necessarily mean that the premium channel for publishers is going away. In fact, my philosophy on what's going to happen is it will make premium super premium. It will take sellers and move them and push them to really justify those very high CPMs and those integrated sponsorships, make advertising more either disruptive or engaging depending on how you look at it. But yes, I do think that the two will be different, but that the premium will change from how it's done today. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you again. And yeah, great to be here.